right. Welcome, everyone. Let's all take a big breath. Excellent. Good to arrive here. We've just started our first breath into sustainable medicine. Yeah. So I'm excited to get to know Didi in person and what she's doing. My understanding in looking into her work is she's the director of the Center for Sustainable Medicine up in the Upper Valley. She's been a long-time acupuncturist and homeopath and community medicine person, offering medicine and healthcare at low cost and looking into different viable ways of keeping people vital and well. She's also spent time in Cuba and looking into their healthcare system that has emerged out of necessity. That also really intrigues me. I can't wait. I hope some of that is covered tonight. And yeah, thanks for coming out tonight, and love being part of this whole transition movement. Does anybody have any announcements or any questions to launch before we begin? Another breath?
What is Didi's last name?
Pershouse.
Thank you.
And without further ado, welcome.
So, I'd like to start off by talking about a comparison that I like to make between sustainable medicine and sustainable agriculture. Our society in general has come to value sterility over fertility, and medicine and agriculture are two of the places that we can see that most clearly. In agriculture, we create a sterile field, literally, and then add chemicals to grow food in modern agriculture. And in modern medicine, they've also done a similar thing of taking one good idea, which was washing your hands before you cut into someone's body, and generalized it out into all of medicine, so that suddenly no one is, if two friends are in hospital rooms next to each other, two best friends, a nurse who knows that fact is not allowed to tell them. How is that contributing to the health of those two people? And that's an example of this sort of sterile mindset applied in a way that's completely irrelevant to what true health is about, which is about interconnection. So some other ways that in medicine, antibiotics are kind of our like the what do you call it?
Panacea.
The panacea, but also in terms of, like in farming, we use things to kill out pesticides, right? So in medicine, we have antibiotics. In a sustainable medicine, we might use antibiotics sometimes, but we would also use probiotics, which most doctors still, even when they give out antibiotics, don't say, eat a lot of yogurt, go take some probiotics. Chemical farming or technological farming is heavily dependent on technology, as is sort of the sterile version of medicine. Sustainable medicine is more based on interconnectedness, on human and natural resources. The sterile model values privacy. The fertile model values connection. The sterile model values like a double-blind study where no one can see any other thing that's going on, and the fertile model values indigenous science, which is where you're trying to understand the whole field at once, and you're trying to perceive things with more than one sense at a time. So those are just a few little tidbits of that, of what I like to think of as that sort of fertile versus sterile, and how we've gone really way off track. That said, I'll tell you a little story about why I just got here just at 5 minutes before the talk was supposed to start, is that I work now out of my home. I ended up moving into my clinic a few years ago to save on energy costs and so that I could take care of my kids when they were sick while I was taking care of people in the community. So yesterday my son, who's had a cough for a bunch of days, came down with hives. And so I spent most of last night, which is why I'll also be fumbling for words tonight because I didn't sleep much, treating him homeopathically through the night for the hives and for the cough. I treat one and the other would get worse. And homeopathic APIs worked brilliantly with the hives. I mean, they were gone in a half an hour. But then his cough came back, so I tried, Anyway, so we were playing that game all night long and a lot of the day. And today I decided, since I was not going to be around, and I know that his dad sometimes panics around these things and would easily take him to the emergency room, and I didn't want him to end up on steroids, to take him into the doctor so that at least someone would have looked at him and he'd have someone to call in the middle of the night. So it turns out he has strep throat and walking pneumonia and hives. So I'm and you're darn right, I'm going to give him some antibiotics. This is a time when it's appropriate. And he's going to get the probiotics to follow up. And the doctor, I have a good doctor, said, keep treating him with the APIs, the homeopathic APIs, and if that fails, then you might want to pick up some Zyrtec just in case. So, that was a beautiful thing. It's like we're understanding each other here. And so the reason I was late tonight is because I had to go over to Dartmouth Hitchcock to have him have a chest X-ray. I mean, this is like big time stuff for a 10-year-old, and who's had no other illnesses other than Lyme disease in his life. So I was thinking it's kind of ironic. Here I am coming here to talk about healthcare and hospitals, and we just went through all the different models that I was planning to talk about. One is home care. It's like that people be trained in their home and actually have a homeopathic pharmacy in their home or whatever else. He also got a Qigong healing session and some acupuncture. That we have enough in our home to treat things up to a certain level, and that we also be trained in triage, and knowing when is it appropriate to call the doctor. So the hives have gone on for 24 hours and they were way better this morning, but now they're getting worse again and his energy's still low. So maybe it's time to just have someone else take a look at this. And then the second level is, I wish that there was a doctor right in my town. I did call my friend, the doctor who lives in town, but he wasn't there. And that I didn't have to drive 15 miles to go just to the clinic, much less the hospital. Because when gas is triple the price, or, God forbid, we have a real actual shortage like Cuba, it would be really nice to have a clinic right in town other than mine, where there's an MD working there as well. So that's the second level, is what do you want to have? How far away are you comfortable having a clinic when gas prices go way up? Who is in your community that you can call? Does everybody in your community know who the medical practitioners are who actually live there? They may work 30 or 40 miles away, but who lives there? Then the next thing was so you have the home, you have the neighborhood healers, which is the doctors and acupuncturists and nurses and EMTs and massage therapists and chiropractors. You want to know who's in your neighborhood, and you want to make your neighborhood an inviting place so that people, so that you get to have one of everybody there. And neighborhood, I'm talking about that you could probably bicycle to them, And then you have a clinic, and hopefully you have a clinic also somewhere in your town, but maybe it's a little bit more than a bike ride to get there, but not too far. And then you have a regional hospital. This is how Cuba has set things up in Venezuela. I'm going to hop around here because I like to start with personal examples. I think it sinks in better. You have a regional hospital, which I don't know how far away is the regional hospital here. How far away from Putney?
11 miles.
11 miles. So you guys are well set up for that. The regional hospital would have an X-ray machine. You know, it would have low-level technology, and some sort of minor specialists. You know, it'd have a pediatrician, it would have a few other things, but you don't need a heart surgeon in every 11 miles. So then you have so that let's see, regional is maybe not the right word. You have you have your area hospital, like your city hospital, and then you have the regional hospital is the bigger one. So the city hospital is the one that everybody's maybe 20 miles from, but it's fine if you're going to have a heart transplant. It's okay to drive 100 miles to have a heart transplant because you're not going to be doing that every year or every month, hopefully. So in the you might leave that to Boston from here. That's okay to have people who can correct a birth deformity, people who are highly specialized, a neurosurgeon. The closer hospitals, you want those to be very well equipped for emergency and trauma care. For burns, for sewing fingers back on, things like that. We need medicine for those things. We don't have to sew fingers back on people. We've lived many thousands of years where something bad happened and you died, and that is one option. But if we want to continue more or less the life that we're accustomed to, then that's the part of medicine that's really worth saving. There's lots and lots and lots of things that happen in doctors' offices and hospitals that are completely unnecessary if people learned a little bit about how to take care of themselves and each other. Let me just go through here a little bit. I'm going to backtrack a little now that I've told my personal story. So what's not working? What's unsustainable about our medical system right now? Hospital buildings use twice the energy of a typical office building. Almost everything in a hospital is made out of petroleum. All plastics, all the food, pretty much all the walls, all the floors, everything it takes to run them. And the kind of care that we've become accustomed to has been available to us only because petroleum has allowed us to create an extremely complex system. Specialty, all these specializations, all these interesting ways of looking into the body, all these interesting ways of treating things, all this research into genes and this and that. It's fascinating. I'm glad we had a chance to play with all of those things. It probably isn't going to be available in 100 years. We won't have the petroleum necessary to keep fueling that type of a system. So let's get the information we can now, but let's also build a system that isn't dependent on that. We know, I'm not going to go through the things that we all know about how our system's unsustainable. Economically, in terms of the rest of the world, it's just absurd what we're spending on medicine here. Malpractice costs, the cost of medical school, the paperwork. Now that they've now there's a goal to get rid of all the paperwork and put it all on computers. So when we have a power outage, there'll be no information available whatsoever. In the doctor's office I went to today, the whole back wall that used to have patients' charts is just empty with nail holes, and they haven't painted it over yet. And I'm like, this is really bad. I do not want to be coming in here and have you have no idea which antibiotics my son is allergic to, when you're having a power outage. Especially then, so there's some big flood happens or something happens, we have a power outage, the water supplies go bad, and that's when people are going to need those drugs, like acute. They're actually going to need them, not because they have an ear infection and someone's worried that they might have a problem, but because they're having a problem. So, anyway, generators are great, but only if you have fuel to put in them. So, ambulances. Guess how many miles per gallon a typical ambulance gets?
8.
That's right. So between 6 and 10. we live in rural areas. You can't, and the way ambulances work, you can't say, well, I'm picking up Mrs. Smith at 3 o'clock, so I'll be there at 3:10 because she lives next door to you. So that's not how ambulances work. When the gas prices went up in 2008, most of the ambulance companies were considering going out of business. And we're almost back up to that number now. So that's something to think about. So the question that I want you to I actually want you to go ask this, is at what price per gallon will your hospital or your clinic no longer make a profit and have it be worthwhile to stay open? They might be able to function, but most of them are there to make money, And so I asked this at our local nonprofit hospital, the sort of, more lower level, the Alice Peck Day. And I forget the exact numbers, but it was something like, they'd lost money for 2 or 3 years in a row, and then they made like $300,000 profit for a couple of years. But their heating bill was close to that. So if heating costs doubled, and I'm not talking about the plastics or the supplies or the cost of the food or any of the rest of the stuff, if heating costs doubled in 2 years, they'd be back at a loss permanently, basically. So, and I went and talked to the facilities manager there, and all of these people, and they wanted to argue about peak oil. It's like, it doesn't matter whether peak oil is a true concept. We already have had gas prices double. So. I find it's easier to talk just on that level rather than to try to convince people about peak oil. So, yeah.
So are you saying you found that hospitals or some comptroller in the hospital is equipped to answer that question?
Mm-hmm.
Acquainted? Yes?
Well, in terms of if you just go on heating and
They're
cooling, if you just go on heating and cooling,
yeah.
that's the simplest one.
They're conversant with that.
Well, there's somebody there who knows how much profit the hospital is making and how much they're spending on fuel bills. So if you just went from that, then they might say, okay, well, we're fine. It could go up 12 times and we'd be fine. And so then you say, okay, well, but if that went up 12 times, then probably the plastics are going to go up that much too. So then, and how much do you spend on that? So you kind of back your way down, and then they start getting really nervous. And then they don't want to talk to you anymore because they don't actually have control over the situation. So this is the thing, is getting teams of people together to work on this stuff so that they don't get stuck in that powerless feeling and in the fear. Because then what I saw happening as I was talking to this is like the green group or whatever at Alice Peck Day, is I could see they weren't thinking about the hospital. They started thinking about their houses and about their kids and about school buses, and because they hadn't been thinking about peak oil at all. So it was, you have to catch somebody in the almost positive part. Like, let's figure out some things that we can do now. So this is a very tricky thing of how do you get those conversations going the right way so that people don't just shut down and go numb. So Dan Bednarz is an ally of mine who's a public health expert who was fired from his teaching job for talking too much about peak oil. And he was in a master's in public health program that he taught down in Pittsburgh. And he started a website sort of similar to mine called Health After Oil. And I asked him if he could just put it down into a few nuggets of this basic problem of our oil-based medical system. So one is the resources we need to provide care are going to become expensive, and then they're going to become scarce. If we don't have the oil to make things, we can't have the things. There's no political solution to this problem. It doesn't matter who we know, and no one else is going to solve this for us. We're going to have to decide what to keep and what to let go of. And if we try to save everything, we're going to lose everything. So that applies in lots of places. But in healthcare, I think it's particularly relevant because it is such a high-tech system that we've developed here. Now, the good news is that especially in Vermont, probably even more especially in Putney, we have a ton of low-tech medical knowledge already here. And so this last point of like, what are we going to keep and what are we not going to keep is important, because if the hospital is shut down, it doesn't matter if the doctors are willing to keep working. If the hospital is shut down and they don't have access to the equipment, to an x-ray machine, they're going to be worrying about their families. They're not going to be going out and buying an x-ray machine so that they can serve the community. So we need to be having these conversations now with people about what do we really need from modern medicine. Like, there's so many things that we don't need it for that some of us already know about. So let's focus on what do we really need, and let's preserve those things and make sure that every community has those things, and then build on, strengthening the other parts that we already know that they work well. Do people here know about ecological footprinting and carbon footprinting? So there's this idea that, like, for everybody to live equitably on the earth, or even just to live on the earth, ultimately, we each get a certain portion of the earth's resources. And this is a little bit of a sidetrack here, but I just want to cover it since I got to that page. To truly keep things going at the population that we have, we'd have to each be living on about an acre's worth of resources each year. In the United States, we're currently living on 24 acres worth per person. So John Lee at Dartmouth-Hitchcock is the head of the waste management department there, and he developed something he calls the EcoHealth footprint calculator for hospitals, where you can plug in all the numbers, and it will tell you the ecological footprint and also the carbon footprint, which has to do with CO2 emissions and global warming. So Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center, you guys are familiar with we call it the, what do we call it, what are those big things that airplanes go on in the ocean? The aircraft carrier, or sometimes we call it Oz because it's all green and lit up. So as a whole, they're using up 75,000 acres of resources per year. Each staff person there, just by working there, is using up 14 acres a year. So in addition to their 28, as just by being an American. And
in addition to their 28 as an American?
Right, they're in their work there, in commuting there and in their work there, they use up 14.
And then they use 28 just by...
Well, I don't know that they're actually using 28. Some of them may be living in yurts, but yeah.
There's an allotment for being just living in the States, and then there's an allotment on top of that for their work.
Right, on average, an American is using 28. In their work day there, they're using an average of 14. So, and I'm not sure exactly how those numbers go together, but there may be an overlap in some of those places, but that's not talking about their home or what they're eating for dinner or any of that part. So, and in terms of the carbon footprint, each staff person is putting out 35.5 tons of CO2 per year in their work there. So that's a lot. Anyway, and that carbon footprint calculator is available for free from John Lee at Dartmouth-Hitchcock. And I can tell you the email right now. It's john.s.lee, L-E-I-G-H, @hitchcock.org. So he got a grant to develop that, and he's very friendly about showing people how to use it, and it's pretty easy. Somebody has to sit down and plug in a lot of numbers, but other than that, it's very simple. It's basically just a really complicated Excel spreadsheet. So.
He's not going to get fired soon?
No, they know that he's doing this, yeah. And surprisingly, he was also willing to give me Dartmouth-Hitchcock's numbers, so that's the part he might get fired for. But no, they're supporting that project. So at the same time that they're building hallways with like 40-foot high ceilings as gas prices are going up. But that, don't ask me to explain that part. So I did travel to Cuba right in the middle of their sort of own little private peak oil experience. I went because I wanted to go there. I speak Spanish. I wanted to go see what it was like in a socialist society while they were still kind of flourishing, because China was already sort of becoming more capitalist. And I also knew that they had a really interesting medical system there. So I went on my own, with my family, but not on a tour, and did a little research, brought a lot of supplies with me, which was great door openers, and ended up visiting a bunch of different acupuncturists and homeopaths and some standard hospitals, and got very inspired by it. This was, this was 10 years ago. So they were just in the sort of middle to end of their special period, where they were really having to cut down on things. And I went there having spent many years in New York City eating great Cuban food, and was really looking forward to that. And all we got to eat was hot dogs and Spam the whole time we were there, because that was all they had. It was, someone asked what we wanted for breakfast in the morning. We were staying, and I was trying to make things simple. I said, well, eggs are fine, because I figured those were cheap. And then the next morning she'd made pancakes. She said, well, I only had one egg, so I figured we could have pancakes. So, it was really, really rough times in terms of food there. And that was before they really had gotten into the whole organic farming in the city part. So we were mostly in the city. They managed, yeah.
Are you going to talk about how the concept of sustainable medicine is integrated into their formal medical training?
Yes, yeah. So, well, actually, in terms of their training, I don't know that much about in terms of their training. I know that they definitely have it integrated in that it is part of their free medical care. So we went and visited one clinic it was in what had been sort of like a prison building, and like pre-revolution prison building, and there were these long hallways, and on every door it was like driving down Main Street of a small Vermont town. There was like magnet therapy and massage therapy and aromatherapy. It was wonderful. There were 50 different things they were offering in this one building, and they would bus in busloads of older people from the countryside. The Red Cross would do this, bring them to the clinic. They'd hang out there together all day, socializing, so it was kind of like a senior center at the same time, which they also did with kids with learning disabilities. They had a program going on there. And they'd get all these treatments absolutely for free, and then get on the bus and go home. And a lot of the people from the clinic, I didn't actually get to meet the director while I was there, because he was in Africa doing, do you know about the medical diplomacy that they do, where they send people around the world instead of killing people to get their oil. They send them around the world and help them to share their oil. So I think it's a much better model. So I'm hoping that we'll figure that one out here too. And then I also met with some people in more standard hospitals where they had an acupuncture department. And I also went to some clinics that were just like here, just a homeopathic clinic or just an acupuncture clinic. They were also doing interesting things in neighborhoods where they had acupuncture clinics, and then have like organic food cooking classes and gardening classes. And so it was the food and the medicine were getting mixed in together. Yeah.
So how are the practitioners paid?
It's a completely socialist communist model there. So it's everybody gets their government stipend. Everybody gets an apartment. Everybody gets food rations. We stayed with a couple different families, and I had my 4-year-old son with me, and there was a 5-year-old girl in the apartment, and she said, "Oh, can I see your toys?" And he opened up his backpack and brought out what he had. And he said, "Can I see your toys?" And she pulled out a box from under the bed, and she had her she got one coupon for a toy on her birthday and one coupon for a toy on Christmas, and those were her toys. They had the same number of toys that he just brought with him, just for the trip. And that was her whole number of things in her box. So it's very different there. There's nothing to buy there, I'm a typical American female traveler. I was like, "Oh, let's go shopping," and there was nothing. There wasn't anything to buy. And I came back feeling so relaxed and so different after a very short trip there. And I was flying back on the plane. I opened up one of those plane magazines, and I see, some like beautiful woman with these boots up to here, and I hear this thought flash through my head. Oh wow, if I had those boots, I would be happy. And then I started to cry, and I cried for hours on the way home because I realized I had not had that thought for the whole week or 10 days or whatever. And I don't read the newspaper. I don't listen to the radio. I don't have television. And yet somewhere, those thoughts are around when you're here, just because somewhere down in West Lebanon there's a place to buy something. So it was a very big moment in my life, and it really changed the direction of my work. Putting like those kinds of experiences together, just in terms of staying with people and seeing how rich just the conversation was when they weren't focused on all this other stuff, and how rich the music was, and how rich a meal was when you knew that the only egg in the house had been used to make the pancakes. So putting that together with what they were doing with medicine, and these people who I talked to in all of these medical practices who were so enthusiastic about what they were doing and so proud of the kind of care they were providing both there and around the world. And I thought, wow, that's really different than how people who practice medicine feel about it in this country. So, let's see, how are we doing time-wise then? Does that say quarter of? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So, other questions about Cuba?
Well, I've seen several of the films.
Did you see Salud? That one about the medical diplomacy?
I haven't seen that one.
Okay.
But the ones I've seen have been either more general or mostly about good farming, especially the organic.
Yes.
Is that all real? And I've wondered, if this held up.
I haven't been back. I'm hoping to go back. Yeah, I'm hoping to go back sometime within the year or so. And I don't know. I didn't get to see that much of it. I was hearing about it. People were talking about organic farms and stuff when I was there. My main liaison there, there was someone just sent me her number literally the night before I was leaving. So I was very lucky. Who worked in healthcare. She was very into organic food, so she was talking quite a lot about that with a lot of excitement because it was pretty new then that they were starting to do that. And I don't know what's happening with it now. They do have a surplus of doctors. They've offered to send doctors to areas like Texas where we don't have enough doctors, and we refused them. They had a whole plane literally sitting on the runway with people with backpacks on, ready to bring a bunch of paramedics and doctors ready to come help out after Katrina, and they were never allowed to come. So it's really interesting. Hopefully, I did hear that Obama had opened things up a little bit. I'm hoping that will continue.
What's your impression about the level of training that they receive?
I suspect that it's perfectly fine. It's probably not the level of technological training that we receive here, but this goes back to the reskilling that I plan to talk about tonight. That my assumption is because they know that they're going to be working in a low-tech system, and they know that there's a good chance that they'll also be working in rural Africa or somewhere else, that they are well-trained, much better trained than our doctors are in the kind of low-tech, hands-on diagnostic and treatment skills that every doctor should have.
And tropical.
What's that?
Tropical.
And tropical, yeah. So they're dealing with some pretty virulent things too.
Why are you making that assumption,
Which assumption?
that they are better trained?
Well, because they don't have the access to the technology, so they're got to be training in something.
Well,
So-
you want them to be training in something. You don't, unless you've heard or seen or whatever what they're actually doing.
Well, I know that they, one of their models is that they have a doctor in every community, and so there's a lot of whether they're getting that training on the scene or whether it's in medical school. I don't know. I know that I do know that they have in Venezuela. The Cuban doctors working in Venezuela have what's called mini medical schools, where they're getting hands-on training in, by working side by side with another doctor. So half the day is spent on theory, and half the day is in practice, which is similar to having a residency here. But here there's a big emphasis on the use of technology because it's available to us, which has been great. But my concern is that because technology has been available to us, if you were to put people people who are trained in a high-tech system suddenly into a low-tech system, that they may have had the classes on that and gotten the training in that way, but that they wouldn't have the skills because those are skills that you need a long-term practice to do. So it is an assumption, but I know that their healthcare markers in general are excellent. So their infant mortality rate and their life expectancy are equivalent, or in some cases better than the United States. And there's got to be something going on that's going right there in terms of what they're actually doing in practice. And so the other thing is that I think working in the neighborhood with people, you get a level of that, sort of what I was saying, indigenous science, of getting to see the whole picture, getting to see people in the context of their home, their family, their environment, their school, their street. If there's a dirty puddle that kids are playing in, their doctor's actually going to see them playing in it because it's on the same street. There's one doctor, I think, for every 125 people in Cuba. Not 125 families or houses, but people. So that's, I'd like probably averaging, 5 or 6 people in a house or in an apartment. That's not very many families that you're taking care of. So that's very, very intimate care that can't help but have that kind of integrated, holistic view of what's going on, of being able to see people in their systems. Yeah.
Question about what you were talking about earlier with it's great that we've been able to play around with some of the research that's not sustainable or too expensive or whatever. I know that when your own child has some sort of illness or your parent is sick or whatever, all of a sudden it's you're willing to spend anything that you can gather together, and you want to be able to mine whatever technology is out there, whatever research is out there. And I'm wondering how you envision, we've had these things, at least for the people who are able, who have insurance or whatever, who are able to access, how you envision this gradually disappearing, or it's kind of a moral and ethical kind of conundrum, I think. If it's there, you're going to want it.
Right. Well, so Dan Bednarz has a lot more to say about that than I do, because my viewpoint is more, as a practitioner who's been trying to practice sort of a more low-tech, embedded in the community, embedded right in my household model. And Dan is a master's in public health professor, and so he's talking more to the CDC and to hospital administrators, and trying to find out how far ahead are people thinking? Are they aware that that this is a very very real possibility that we're going to face a crisis in terms of just not being able to fuel these things. And also, he also talks a lot about research money drying up really quick, in a very quick, amount of time, because a lot of the money that's fueling the research is coming from investments that are based on, things continuing to grow and et cetera. So he's looking a lot more into like the economics of it and the politics and the big system. We're kind of a nice team that way, because like I can sort of say, well, yeah, but this is what we can do, so he thinks that from what he's saying, that there are very, very, very few people who are willing to even talk about it as a possibility. And because of that, he thinks it's much more likely that it's going to be a real crisis and that things are going to suddenly fall apart, that that one or two hospitals closes, that puts a lot of pressure on another hospital, it's sort of a domino effect. And that we're going to have to make some really tough choices about rationing care, and how are we going to do that? It totally depends on who the players are in any particular area or scene or in the political scene. So is it going to be that after a certain age that you're not eligible for cancer treatments? It could be. I mean, there's lots of things lots of sort of reasonable solutions, but that aren't going to feel reasonable to any person who's in the position of not getting the thing. But if we can see that coming now and start thinking about what does make sense and start having the feelings now instead of when it's actually in crisis, so we can get through the icky feeling part and get to clear thinking on the other side of it, we're going to be in a much better position to say, well, actually some of us already thought through this. This is what we think would make sense here. And I don't know what those, I don't know what the solutions are in terms of rationing stuff or in terms of that. I can tell you that I think if you got a group of clear-thinking doctors together, people who work in that side of medicine, which I don't, that they could tell you what are the things that are the least expensive to provide and that that are truly life-saving, that are truly helping the quality of life, as opposed to things that they don't really have anything better to do, so they'll give this drug, or that they don't really know what to do, so they'll do some more tests. And those are places where, luckily it's actually a pretty good mix, because a lot of those cases are places where people in the more alternative medicine community say, oh, I know how to do that. I know how to treat that. That's easy. Don't bring me somebody who's chopped their finger off. But, if you bring me somebody with, irregular periods or irritable bowel or that kind of thing, those, or depression or anxiety, those are things I feel very comfortable treating. I treat every day. So, we do have a complete system, but one side is going to have to let go of saying, oh, we want to treat everything, and that'll be fine because they won't be able to. But the question is, can we figure out now which things would be reasonable to drop out and have hospitals stop investing so much money in that, and start investing money in saying, okay, well, let's bring in a group of acupuncturists or a group of herbalists or whatever it is. I mean, there are lots and lots of great treatment modalities out there. So, yeah.
For example, even if we succeed in producing and stabilizing nuclear fuel cells that will be necessary to power an MRI or an X-ray facility, even at a reduced rate of service, and we over-rely on them now, but they won't be able to be powered unless they go for that technology, and I'm not sure how shaky that's going to be. What do we know about the pharmaceutical industry? I mean, if anybody hasn't seen the world headquarters of Pfizer down in New London, Connecticut, I think you need to go pretty soon, because apparently it's not sustainable lately, now already. On one side of the river, is the corporate headquarters, which looks like the biggest damn Hilton you've ever seen. Very, very pink granite and gorgeous and luxurious. And across the river where the production facilities are and several of the other pharmaceutical giants that they've bought out. It reminds me of a oil refiner.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got security fences like a, nuclear depot or military site. And it's pretty creepy and it employs a lot of people, but apparently they're going to have to move because they can't afford it.
Interesting. Yeah. So there's one community in California that I'm collaborating a little bit with, who they're a community kind of similar in size to a lot of the towns around here. Maybe less than 5,000 people. And they sent out a survey to their residents, finding out, and it was anonymous because it was obviously a personal question, finding out what drugs people were on. And I think they got maybe 30% of people to respond. And then they set about trying to figure out which of those drugs are drugs that there are alternative treatments that those people could be using if they had access to them, if they could afford them, etc. And which are the ones that they want to make sure they are going to have access to, that are life-saving drugs that there isn't a really good solution for. So that's the kind of thinking that I think we should be doing, and getting together alternative practitioners with doctors where there's enough trust there to have that conversation and say, no, I really can treat this. I can show you 80 cured cases of this. We really do have a handle on this part. So you can let go of that part. And I really can't treat that part. I want you for those phases. That's when I'm going to bring my child to you. That's, etc. We can divvy this up in a way that will make sense, and we'll actually be healthier if we do that. I mean, the long-term drug side effects from treatments that aren't really working, where you have to end up staying on a drug that you don't really need, your body doesn't really want, but there isn't any other solution in high-tech medicine. We don't need to be doing that. There are other alternatives. Most people can't afford them. So the other piece is that alternative practitioners need to figure out business models and ways of working, since I wouldn't hold your breath for the insurance companies, because even if they decide to cover you, they may also, fold up, it's that system itself isn't a great long-term fix itself. So we need to figure out ways of being able to either live simply enough ourselves and or provide affordable medicine for people. So one model of that is the community acupuncture model that's developed out in Portland, Oregon, and that's really sweeping around the country, where people can get acupuncture 2 or 3 times a week for as little as $10 to $15 a treatment, depending on how it's set up. And it turns out you don't need to have an hour-long conversation with your acupuncturist every week. That you can do that if the acupuncturist sits there. If they're only seeing 5 people a week and they need to make that money, then you can stretch it out. I've done that myself in the past. Where it's like, well, this person is lonely and they need to talk about their problems. So why don't I just be their counselor too? And that serves a purpose in the model that we're working in, but it's not. You don't need that for acupuncture. You can do a treatment in 5 or 10 minutes, and then let the person lie there and move on to the next person. And you can do very effective treatments that way. In India, a homeopath, it typically would see 40 or 50 people in a day. I was trained to do 3-hour intakes, so. It's just a very different way of looking at it. That alternative people are expected to pick up the slack for people in society not knowing how to actually give each other good attention, and we can change that. So there are other models for the community, the skills, in terms of reskilling our community of how do we take care of each other, that are also really simple. So there's peer counseling models like co-counseling or reevaluation counseling, nonviolent communication, things like that. That we can be taking care of each other in much better ways. We can be teaching that stuff in high schools and elementary schools. We can be teaching that stuff so that teachers are supporting each other, so that people in healthcare facilities are supporting each other. so that the whole stress level just goes down. People can get rid of their junk and move on and think clearly. So those are some of the skills that if we as a community pick up and take on that, then we don't need to rely on doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists as much, except for in really acute situations. So we have solutions, but we're not using them.
When you were talking about your colleague with the website, is he saying that nobody's really talking about this?
He's saying that very few people I'm amazed that there's very little going on even in transition towns around healthcare. I mean, the transition handbook had 1 or 2 pages about healthcare, and healthcare is a pretty big part of our lives.
So the eco-village movement.
You say it's the same?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think I think that part of what's going on is it's one of those places where we've really handed our power over, where we don't think that we should even be part of the conversation because someone else is going to take care of it. And we've been very, very sort of dumbed down, and there's a real hierarchy and power structure in medicine that makes us feel like we don't have any, our opinions don't count, that we're dumb, that we don't know anything, that we should just leave it up to the people who do. But the problem is that they feel the same way because the system is sort of treating that, even the doctors feel like they don't have any power because the insurance companies are paying them, or that the pharmaceutical companies are the ones with the money, or the hospital administrators. So there's and the hospital administrators and the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies are just more human beings with fears about their families, about their incomes, and that as soon as the fear button gets pushed, they're going to say, no, you're wrong, that's not what's going to happen. So they're not going to have the conversation either. So
The Wizard of Oz. Who's behind the curtain?
Yeah. So nobody's to blame here. Everybody's just playing out the social pattern that they were trained in. But we have a choice of saying, hey, wait a minute, I want things to go well, and we have a lot to offer. We have a lot of things. The one thing about healthcare is we all have experience with it. I mean, we've all had experience, with doctors. We've all had experience with hospitals. Most people have had some experience with some sort of an alternative practitioner, at the very least a chiropractor or a massage therapist. So we have a lot of information. And Susan Weed talks about the mothering in the non-gendered sense of what happens in the home, taking care of other people, that is, all healthcare is based on that. And that is, just figuring out what to feed somebody, figuring out what time to put them to bed, figuring out whether to send them outside to play or not, figuring out whether they have the right amount of clothes on, figuring out whether to call the doctor or not, whether this cut is infected or not. They're doing triage and care and nursing and doctoring all day long. And most of us are in that role somewhere in our lives. So we have a huge amount of power. We have a lot of impact over the health of people around us. And as our parents get older, the same thing. And we're the ones who are making those choices.
Yeah, and working as an acupuncturist for years, the amount that I've learned from people is huge. I've learned as much, at least, from the clients that I work with, and because they're special. If somebody has something wrong with them, they become a specialist.
Mm-hmm.
They look into every option.
Right.
One single healthcare practitioner, you can't know as much as that.
That's the great thing about having an hour-long conversation with your clients, is because you learn a lot. And when someone comes in with something I don't know a lot about, I definitely, want to know anything that they've figured out, because you're right, they've usually done much more research than I would have time to do, and they can distill it and get it across. So they've figured out which websites have really good information and which ones don't, and what supplements have helped them in the past and which ones haven't.
And as a community, to be able to mine that collective genius, there's a lot more information than just a few pop healthcare practitioners in general.
Yeah. Did I talk about free medical schools? So in Cuba, the medical schools are free. I mean, this is one of the reasons why whoever asked about, how do they pay their doctors, if doctors here didn't come out of medical school with these enormous loans and with enormous malpractice insurance bills, we could have healthcare that was totally affordable. So 1 day of the Iraq War would pay for 35,000 medical school educations. 1 day. So don't tell me it can't be done.
You're talking about less about healthcare in this being achieved and more about a total green mindset, less capitalistic green mindset. I mean, this country's built on capitalism, on individuals.
Oh, well.
Not on community.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one thing in a population of 5,000, in a place like Putney,
Mm-hmm.
or the like, to have this model possibly develop. But in an urban city, high-tech urban city, or just an urban city, areas where you have more affluence, where people are used to that kind of care, no matter how lousy the doctors are, how impersonal they are.
Mm-hmm.
It's a culture. They're not even your audience. You'll never be talking to them until there's a crisis.
Mm-hmm. Right, but if we can figure some of it out in Putney now, just like we're figuring out about how to feed each other, that we may be the resource that they come to and say, uh-oh, we didn't think that we needed to think about this, but we do. What are you guys doing again?
Yeah.
So, and it may be that because of the AMA, we can't actually have a free medical school here. But if every doctor who was in private practice was willing to take on someone under their wing to learn everything they could teach them, and in exchange for them agreeing to work either in that community or in an underserved community, which is basically what the Cuban model and the model that they've done in other countries where they're doing this. They may not be able to get a medical license, but you'll have somebody who knows a lot, and maybe they can have a nursing license, or maybe they can be a really, really brilliant acupuncturist or something, or if every acupuncturist was willing to do that. It doesn't take, you've got free help there, so it doesn't, you don't necessarily have to, it doesn't have to be something that's costing a lot to provide.
That's where the liability culture is going to stop.
But we're not going to have any choice. I mean, they just woke up one day in Cuba and there was no more oil.
And I think that's what's going, I think that's the only thing that this society is, not the smaller places that sound silly, they're a little more intelligent about it. But the oblivious larger ones,
Yeah.
it's going to, unfortunately, I think.
So we do what we can do where we can do it. And there are people who are thinking about this, some who are in the cities. Dan Bednarz, the person I mentioned, was in Pittsburgh and now he's in Boston. And there's different things to figure out there. It's going to be slightly different problems there. There are things that are going to be easier there, and there are things that are going to be harder there. I live in a town of 2,000 people, so that's the model that I'm most interested in looking at. And there are plenty of towns. If that means that I only end up speaking to a quarter of the population, that's okay. That'll be my spot. I'm not going to try to talk about something I don't know. So I did. I lived in New York City for 10 years. I grew up in Boston, so I know what those look like, and I know what those attitudes are. That's how, I was raised in a relatively affluent family in the city, so I can speak to that. But that's not the model that I'm developing, because that's not where I'm living now. So.
Didi May mentioned that we did show Salute here.
Okay.
Putney did.
Yeah, so some people have
Yes,
seen that.
we
Yeah.
had about 50, 60 people in the community came. It was a wonderful evening event, and I was deeply inspired. How many people were there? I don't recognize. I know Brett was, John was, Steve. And wouldn't you say, I left that night, I was floating on air. I was so impressed with the free medical education now that they're offering, but the work they've done in Africa and Ecuador.
Yeah.
And they are really wonderful doctors. They are well-trained, they're intelligent, and they're heart-driven. Brett, don't you think? That's what really stunned me.
I hear from
Community and heart-driven.
one of my other allies was Dale Gebhardt, who was a community medicine person, and he was an MD in Windsor for 40 years or something. He was like the small town doctor there, he and other people I know who have done projects overseas, where they volunteered at a refugee camp or something for a while. They've all talked about that the Cuban doctors and their dedication, and that they're,
And they'll go places nobody else will go.
and they'll stay in a war zone, yeah.
In the war zone, and they'll stay
Yeah.
for 2 years.
And they're not just treating, it's not just, they're delivering babies, they're doing, basic human care. It's not just like war stuff or poverty-related stuff. It's
Stunning.
so.
Absolutely stunning. I strongly encourage anyone who has that interest to view the movie. It was really answered a lot of questions, I think.
Yeah, we should even bring it back here again.
I was just thinking so, yeah.